Video games should be movies. This is an actual conviction that I held. Let's wind back the clock a bit. Pretend you're me and you're back in the year 2017. You're a freshly minted film production major at Webster University and you're itching to make a name for yourself. Prove you're the innately gifted filmmaker your high school teacher said you'd be. You get to know some of your peers, some of them leagues ahead of you, already working in the industry straight out of high school, just looking for the legitimacy of a degree and the networking only film school can provide. Some of your peers ask about your favorite films, the ones that inspire you, the ones that you pull from in your style and approach. They cite the classics, On the Waterfront, 8.5, The 400 Blows, Bonnie and Clyde. You respond with Metal Gear Solid 5. Your peers play games, sure, they've hopped into GTA Online lobbies and might have an opinion about Detroit Become Human, but most of all, you're surprised to meet other students who don't really play games at all. You're taken aback. That's an entire art form, a pile of unengaged stories just sitting there to pull from. You accept it, sure, you want so desperately to work with these people and to have them like you, but video games carved out such an integral role in your upbringing that it's hard to imagine someone who could go their entire life without engaging with one. You put that aside for now. You keep the visual novels and squad sessions confined to your dorm room. You attend lecture after lecture, listening to every professor tenderly ingrain each burgeoning wrinkle in your brain with the idea that only film can convey the human experience. And the games, in their current form, only meekly imitate what film can do. Then, for myriad reasons, you drop out after your sophomore year, but you keep the mindset. Games stay a hobby with film as your first and only passion. It's 2020 now. In comes COVID. The film industry, nationally, globally, puts itself on ice. The so-called most collaborative medium in history now limits itself to remote one-man band work, and pandemic unemployment assistance allows most to stay home. For a time. Then comes Dark Souls 3. Video games should just be movies is a mantra that I, as a 21-year-old film school dropout trying to make a name for herself in the St. Louis independent film and commercial scene, just casually accepted without any critical thought. Games require a compelling narrative containing fleshed-out characters that experience an arc that wraps itself up in a neat little bow. Bonus points if I cry at the end. Consequently, I perceived game mechanics as obstacles to experiencing that story. The less intrusive the gameplay, the greater the storytelling potential. My studies in film instilled this idea that games, in their current form, still struggle to define what kinds of stories they're particularly great at telling. Let's take written formats like novels, for example. Through any perspective, first person, third person omniscient, even second person if you're a freak like me, you're allowed complete access to a character's thoughts and beliefs about the actions they perform. As I had it explained to me by one of my old professors, you know exactly what something tastes like when you're reading a book. Visual formats like painting, photography, cinema can't do that. The audience only sees a reaction to that taste. You're able to gather some idea of what it might be, but never a direct explanation. In that place, however, the artist possesses a totally different toolset, now able to tell a story through the placement and movement of elements within a frame, often without requiring spoken word if they do it right. When that same professor brought up video games, he brushed them off. With a wave of his hand, he proclaimed, "Video games are just trying to be movies. It's a visual medium. It's no different." It should be noted that the same professor went on to become a generative AI shill. He was wrong about games, for countless reasons that should be presently obvious. Games had already been telling stories only games can tell since at least the 1990s, like in Silent Hill, Half-Life, and Metal Gear Solid. Each of these games wore their cinematic influence on their sleeves and fumbled in more than a few ways, but pushed their mechanics to the forefront in ways that engaged and innovated. So when I first played Dark Souls 3 in 2020 and experienced firsthand the kind of storytelling found in games and games alone, and in one of the games quite possibly best suited to do so, it kind of broke me. Perhaps one of the strongest examples of my taste in games before this religious experience is No Code's 2019 sci-fi horror adventure game Observation. You take control of Sam, an AI software in charge of a space station, as you, and the only surviving crew member Emma, end up in the orbit of Saturn under mysterious and freaky circumstances. The callbacks to 2001: A Space Odyssey feel like low-hanging fruit in any analysis of this game, but that's not the only aspect of it that I could describe as cinematic. While Sam can fart around a relatively open station through a free-floating drone powered by jets of CO2, most of the game's visuals take place through FNAF-esque security cameras with immaculate lo-fi user interfaces. Your only agency shows in your ability to open doors, hack laptops, and solve puzzles. It's a lovely, unobtrusive experience that gets out of the way of the decent sci-fi thriller film you're treated to throughout its runtime. If you're me at 21, of course, doing her hardest to appeal to 30-something cis men among whom The Rock stands proudly as their favorite film, Observation's gorgeously eerie visuals tickled my aspiring cinematographer brain. It felt like a movie, so it was good. Let's flip this coin and look at the opposite, a game I couldn't fully engage with. Transistor, a 2014 veritable cult classic from creative powerhouse Supergiant Games, gripped me by the pupils with its breathtaking painterly visuals and by the eardrums with Darren Korb's goosebump-conjuring post-rock soundtrack. It's too bad I had to wade through all this tight, frenetic tactical gameplay to experience it. Looking back, Transistor's combat and unique blend of real-time and turn-based mechanics stand out as the obvious stars of the show, the main draw of the game for countless people. For younger me, unable to take game mechanics themselves as serious art, it came off as a slog, like chores I had to do to get to my real appeal of the game. It's stunning vistas and gripping story beats. It didn't feel like a movie, so it wasn't as good as it could be. Hey, Michael. Yeah, statistically your name is Michael. You remember 2020 like I do, right? Back when we weren't tired of Star Wars yet? When we met every announcement from Disney with cheers rather than groans. It would be impossible to talk about the run-up to my finally trying Dark Souls 3 without mentioning Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. This game, it's a lot of things. For one thing, it's Star Wars. You have your glup shittos, your John Williams takeoff soundtrack, and your poignant meditations on war, grief, and fascism. It's Uncharted, it's Titanfall, you're climbing cliffs and swinging on ropes and running on walls. Somehow, though, it's a Souls-like? And one of the most inspired moves a Star Wars branded game could make. Like that alone, insane marketing, a Star Wars Souls-like. Just saying that sounds fucking awesome, and it's real. It's a beloved game to a lot of people. I can't believe it came out a whole 6 years ago. A Star Wars Souls-like is real, and I played it, and it was the first step to me thinking about games in a fundamentally different way. Fallen Order's particular approach also makes it the perfect gateway drug to Soulsborne gameplay. It still has bonfires, swordplay, boss fights, and seamless integration of gameplay mechanics to the narrative and world, but it also has multiple difficulty options and forgiving parry windows for those that would otherwise be put off by Dark Souls' notorious difficulty. It certainly helps that the behemoth Star Wars branding printed onto it draws some eyes that would have otherwise overlooked it. Fallen Order, from beginning to end, totally altered the way I thought about Souls-likes. Chiefly that Souls-like does not automatically equate to difficult, just different. It's a different method of designing an experience and interacting with a game's world compared to traditional AAA handholding. And while there's still plenty of handholding in Fallen Order, it kept the leash just loose enough for this puppy girl to learn and explore. It enthralled me. I found myself playing a game to play it rather than watch it. Mastering the swordplay and exploring the world felt just as compelling as Cal's journey, and in so many ways, these things compounded onto each other. When I rolled credits on it, sitting there on my friend's futon while a global pandemic ravaged outside, I thought maybe, just maybe, having played this and enjoying it thoroughly, I could try a Dark Souls game. To my luck, Dark Souls 3 was on sale. I'll probably catch a little bit of flack in the comments for not starting with the OG, and that's okay. Thank you for the engagement nonetheless, but something about booting up Dark Souls 3 for the first time, right there on my friend's futon, struck some chord deep in my psyche. I didn't have the words for it, but on some level I knew that once I hit new game, it would alter me forever. I started in the Cemetery of Ash and familiarized myself with the controls. It's here you meet the game's first filter, Yodex Gundyr. Having beaten him possibly dozens of times now, I'm more than capable of running his fade over and over again, but sitting there in that living room, this proved to be the most challenging first boss I'd ever fought. Gundyr, through and through, stands as a thesis statement. Upon your journey ahead, you're going to be pummeled into the earth dozens, if not hundreds of times, in countless numbers of ways. If you don't have the patience for this guy, you're not going to stand a chance. It probably took more tries than I'd like to admit before I finally defeated him, but if it hadn't been for Fallen Order showing me that with this type of game, you get out what you put in, I wouldn't have had the patience nor determination to try over and over again. After the Gundyr fight, I made my way to Firelink Shrine, and I remember my first reaction upon entering possessing a distinct twinge of fear and anxiety. If Gundyr is the game's first impression, then who knows what I'll find through this next door. Thankfully, Firelink Shrine and the Firekeeper showed themselves to be my one safe zone, a hub from which I'll conquer this game, and moreover myself. I placed the coiled sword into the bonfire, then set out, sword at the ready. I learned a bunch, often the hard way. Weapon upgrading and scaling initially seemed alien to me, but I eventually slammed two rocks together hard enough to realize those characteristics I'd been leveling, aside from vigor and endurance, had an effect on the damage I could deal with my sword, and these funny-looking gems I found could help or hurt that. I also noticed these wacky-looking sigils on the ground whenever I'd squished an ember outside of a boss fog wall. Then I figured out that I could summon NPCs and even other players from across the globe to help me with fights, and in no way does the game punish me for it. In fact, in doing so, I'm actively helping other players in their runs, rewarding them with extra souls and embers in exchange for helping me to tackle a tough boss. That road runs both ways too. I could set on my summon sign and help another player with a boss I'd already defeated. Better people than myself have discussed Dark Souls' recurring motifs of coping with hardship through seeking aid and community with others for about as long as Dark Souls has been around. In Dark Souls 3, it's no different, and frankly, it's turned up to 11. One could say Dark Souls 3 tells an apocalypse narrative. Once again, the fire fades, and the one meant to continue it has shirked his responsibility. He's seen the writing on the wall. A failsafe activates. The four lords that serve as the game's keystone bosses awaken to take over, though all but one stand horrified at the devastated world they see and find no value in saving it. Then awakens you. Unkindled, the Hail Mary, a reanimated pile of ash, what remains of a failed link in the line to keep the first flame burning. If you fail, the world ends, plunged back into the eternal darkness from whence it came. There's something immensely powerful in this search for companionship while the world falls apart around you, and it's sure as hell something that resonated with me when I first played it in 2020. It still resonates with me now, with all that's happened in the last couple of years. Even outside of the multiplayer and NPC summoning aspects, one of the subtle ways Dark Souls 3 integrates this theme into its gameplay appears in the NPC vendors you're able to find for Firelink Shrine. Each of these characters possess whole stories and quests in their own right, and all of them stop to lend a hand when you need it most. All you have to do is find them, talk to them, give them what they ask in return, and before you know it, you'll have your own little community, your own little posse for the end of the world. When I finally rolled credits on Dark Souls 3, after summoning help for the Soul of Cinder, of course, I did something I've never done with a game before. I immediately started New Game Plus. The idea of taking on every zone, every boss once again, knowing what I know now, capable of so much more agility and lethality, of course it appealed to me. I challenged myself to take on more bosses solo, and wholeheartedly surprised myself at how much more I could hold my own. I hadn't mastered the game, far from it, but the monolithic difficulty of Dark Souls games became a known quantity, something I could work toward, areas of myself I could always improve. Never before had a game so heartily captivated me with gameplay that didn't just challenge me, but nurture me. For once, I felt a total cohesion between what story a game wanted to tell and the mechanics that support those themes. Those mechanics asked a lot of me, but it didn't feel like a chore I had to wade through to get to the story as so many games in this vein had felt before. The mechanics were the storytelling, and vice versa. After the process of making this video, I feel comfortable saying that Dark Souls 3 stands as my favorite game, in the same way Swiss Army Man is my favorite movie for making me gay and trans video to come. It's obvious now, and I've said it multiple times already, but it changed the way I thought about games by showing me how games can tell stories. In fact, Dark Souls 3 might be a perfect example of how games tell stories. Can games even tell stories? Should they? Let's get one important thing out of the way. Games can and have told stories for as long as games have been around. Take lacrosse, which has indigenous and First Nations origins, and massive kilometer-long field games designed to both keep its hundreds of players healthy and pay respect to their creators. One of the oldest board games in the world, the Royal Game of Ur, held value as a tool for divine revelations to those who played it. Hell, half if not most of the fun of watching modern sports emerges from following players and teams throughout their careers. You experience their highs, their lows, and development as human beings. Video games can and should tell stories in kind, but it's not a shock that this was once, and to an extent still is, a matter of debate. Back in 2015, Chris Franklin of Errant Signal released a video titled The Debate That Never Took Place, tackling some of the chief concerns of game criticism at the time. It's a great video and you should go watch it, but I'll give the cliff notes. The primary concern emerged from an apparent tactic most game critics adopted that aimed to separate discussion of a game's narrative from its gameplay. That these were two distinct aspects of a game that had to be analyzed independently of one another. Most of this discourse surrounded basic terminology. No one could really agree on a common set of language for discussing games as stories, plus a convoluted game of telephone and misunderstood intentions led to debates around ludology versus narratology and loaded terms like ludocentrism and ludonarrative dissonance. The argument for ludocentrism, also known as ludofundamentalism, there's a lot of nuance there, but for the most part I've seen these terms used interchangeably, centered around games as systems first and foremost. Games can't tell stories in the traditional sense, with characters, arcs, themes, and politics, and whatever stories do emerge center the player through deep, complex systems and emergent gameplay. In a way, it's an opposing philosophy to my old convictions about games, that they should be stories first and games second. In learning to appreciate mechanics through playing Dark Souls and other games that champion storytelling through gameplay, I resonated with ludocentrism to an extent, but there's some serious glaring flaws in the ludocentrist mythos. Ludocentrism itself shares values with formalism, an approach to literary critique that seeks to analyze a work's form over its content, removing all external factors like the author's life, intent, historical context, etc., and focusing exclusively on the composition or form of the text itself. A formalist, for instance, might analyze the particular craftsmanship and engineering directly observable within a Catholic cathedral, while a more holistic approach, perhaps even a Marxist approach, which formalism aligned against, would take into account why these craftsmen and engineers built the cathedral to begin with, and how its construction reflected the values of the time and the architect who built it. Ludocentrism fits neatly within the formalist framework, a rejection of a holistic critique in favor of exclusive focus on a game's internal craft. Ludocentrist and formalist ideas in the games industry really only had their time in the sun around the mid-2010s, and fell out of favor as more holistic approaches to game theory won out. And even bringing up these concepts, I'm digging up old, outdated discourse, but it still felt worth it to discuss these ideas and critically analyze them. At its core, the debate between ludocentrism and its critics really does stab at the beating heart of what games should strive to be. Additionally, Dark Souls 3, having been released in 2016, likely would have been subjected to this same discourse at the time. Over the years, critics thankfully began looking at the whole picture when discussing a game, and society at large began accepting games as an artistic medium in somewhat more serious ways. One game in particular, quite recently even, set the world ablaze with its particular artistic approach. Let's briefly talk about horses. Italy-based studio Santa Ragione's 2025 game Horses, directed by filmmaker Andrea Luco Borlera, sees the player taking control of Anselmo, a 20-year-old student taking a summer job at a countryside horse farm. Almost immediately, he learns that the horses aren't horses at all, but human beings that have been captured, masked, and enslaved in sickeningly inhumane conditions. The game's art direction derives much of its influence from surrealist cinema, meant to be taken as if you're watching a silent film, lending every moment a foreboding unease. Horses features intentionally violent and shocking imagery, utilizing its gameplay as a vessel for frank discussions on dehumanization under fascism. Valve and Epic's choice to ban the game from their storefronts generated intense controversy and a heated discussion on censorship in games. Countless masses spoke out against this action, seeing it as an attack on free expression, while, interestingly enough, those in what remained of the formalist crowd attained some kind of vindication in this censorship. They raised it up as glowing proof of games' inability to tell serious stories with serious themes. This game tried it, and it didn't work, so it deserved to be banned. Ian Bogost, writer, dev, and notorious formalist, made his opinion on Horses known on Blue Sky. I've been at this a long time. Games culture wants the spoils of cultural sophistication without doing the work. It wants a guarantee that the intention to make work guarantees not just a living, but a thriving one. It is a medium for children. The interesting, sophisticated thing about games is not whether they can tell stories as well as books or movies, they can't, or float shocking themes as well as fine art, honestly, who cares? It's the manipulation of systems, the play of contingency, the brokenness of machines. Queue Up and Candy Crush, say, are more serious works of game than Horses, which seems fine, and even innocuous, or whatever embarrassing anime RPG trash is on Steam or Nintendo eShop. In response, Santa Ragione's official Blue Sky account had this to say. When we made our systemic game Miramoon EP about the manipulation of systems, the play of contingency, and the brokenness of machines, you commented, "Oh, so experimental games mean portal guns now?" It traumatized us so much we've been making games exclusively about Italian politics ever since. I just felt like throwing that in because I think it's very funny. Harper J, games writer and self-described anti-formalist, posted a review of Horses to their Tumblr, where they discussed how the themes of dehumanization in Horses' narrative almost uncannily match up to the discourse surrounding the game, citing Bogost's hot takes. Time and time again, over the years, when formalists talk about their derision towards game stories, this comes hand in hand with what is frankly a kind of racism. This is particularly true with Bogost, who often slips into Orientalist jabs. Bogost cannot help, for instance, tossing a jab at JRPGs often, and I think it's important to identify that for what it is. Bogost doesn't simply believe that only certain kinds of games are games, he also believes that only certain kinds of developers can make those games. There are people and there are fucking horses, you know? Ludocentrism just ain't it. It's a reductive perspective on games as art that ignores the history of the very medium it seeks to uplift, cultivates a purist mindset devoid of real human emotional engagement, and, worst of all, indicates underlying prejudice. There's a reason we left it behind a decade ago. Formalists would rather see 1,000 Candy Crushes if it meant we had no more pathologics. Games can tell stories. Deep ones that comment on the human condition in ways no other medium can do, and any appeal to the contrary is a non-starter. Let's briefly talk about ludonarrative dissonance, which occurs when a game's story and its mechanics appear to be out of phase with one another, conveying to the player opposing ideas with both aspects telling different stories. This idea generally falls under a formalist, ludocentric framework in that it seeks to separate a game's systems from its narrative in analyzing that game. In Dan Olson's video on ludonarrative dissonance, however, he argues a defense of the term outside of a formalist framework, countering Franklin's argument that we wouldn't discuss movies as being cinema-narratively dissonant and that there really are films that genuinely fit that description. In this, it's actually a useful tool in games criticism, a way to analyze the strength of a game's direction and the cohesion of its development. Again, obvious here, but go watch Folding Ideas, I shouldn't have to tell you this. Olson's follow-up video expanded further on precisely how gameplay interacts with narrative structure in ways that reduce dissonance, and centered on the core idea of intended play. He argues that compared to movies and literature, not only do games have intended interpretations, but also intended play. A filmmaker or author generally expects only one thing from their audience. They watch the film, they read the book. A game developer, by contrast, expects that a player will do something unexpected, and has to account for that in their narrative design. In his own words,
games are constantly telling us to do one thing, and then waiting to see if we actually do it.
Intentional disobedience and agency, then, emerges as this core pillar of narrative in games. Choice is the smoking gun here. It's to games what the Kuleshov effect is to films. All games fundamentally revolve around choices, whether they come from free-form emergent gameplay or an intentional branch of a tree written by an author with a plan. That's something neither films, photography, painting, literature, nor theater can do, at least not as well as games can. And holy guacamole, does Dark Souls 3 have... One of the first things you can do in Dark Souls 3 that you're implicitly told not to is slaughter every breathing NPC in Firelink Shrine. Each one reacts in a unique way. The Firekeeper responds and forgives you, while Blacksmith Andre also responds but denies you his services for the rest of the game, unless you absolve your sins or begin New Game Plus. Others will straight up die, and you'll never be able to bring them back for the rest of the run. High Priestess Emma is another vital NPC you can moida early on. In the normal path you're implied to take, she provides you with the banner needed to enter the undead settlement after defeating Fort. Then she'll teleport you back to her church after you've defeated 3 Lords of Cinder, die of natural causes, and provide you with the Basin of Vows to continue onward to the Lothar Castle, a late-game area. But, if you're brave enough, you can just kill her. You'll get the Basin just an hour or two into the game and gain access to a late-game area faster than you would have otherwise. The only hang-up is that you'll have to deal with Dancer of the Boreal Valley, one of the most notoriously challenging bosses in the game, whose fight starts as soon as you use the Basin. Let's discuss NPC quests while we're here too. Henri of Astora and Horus the Hushed first appear in the game after you've made it to the Road of Sacrifices, and like you, they're unkindled, specifically hunting the Lord of Cinder Aldrich, Devourer of Gods. After this first introduction and defeating the Deacons of the Deep, they appear again in Firelink Shrine, and then again in the Catacombs of Karthus. It becomes an acutely active effort on the player's part to keep up with Henri and Horus once you find them in the Catacombs, and you have to diligently seek them out to continue their quest. It's here where you're presented with the quest's first branch, how you deal with Horus now that he's gone hollow. If you don't kill him but tell Henri his location, he'll kill Henri, but if you do kill him and tell Henri about the Smoldering Lake, Henri gives you a ring and appears next at the Church of Yorska. The Church of Yorska presents yet another 2 branches, one continuing Henri's quest to slay Aldrich, and the other tying into an entirely separate ending for the game. The way you make this decision, however, rests on swinging your sword at one particular statue in a corner of the room, revealing it to be a disguised pilgrim spying for another character that also needs context. Yoel of Londor appears in the Undead Settlement, in another situation where you, the player, have to actively seek him out by exploring down the wall away from the path toward the settlement. If you choose to take him into your service, he teleports to Firelink Shrine, where he'll offer free leveling in exchange for branding you with a dark sign and turning you hollow. Once you do this 5 times, he dies, and a new character, Yuria of Londor, takes his place. Yuria, seeing that you're both a lord and hollow, offers to help you become Lord of Hollows. This ties back into Henri's quest. Let's say you don't kill that pilgrim, who happened to be spying for Yuria back at the Church of Yorska. What then? Once you spare him, then defeat Pontiff Sullivan, you can talk to Yuria at the shrine, who will inform you that your spouse awaits you in the Temple of the Dark Moon. Make your way to this temple shortly before Anorlando, the zone you fight Aldrich in, to find Henri's dead body lying on an altar. Perform the ceremony, talk to Yuria once again, then continue on to beat the game and defeat the Soul of Cinder. When you go to Link the Fire, you get an entirely new ending for the game. You usurp the fire, taking it for yourself, and the Hollows of Londor look to you as their ruler. If that's not the game reacting to your intentional disobedience, then I don't know what is. One interesting thing about the Temple of the Dark Moon, where your freaky marriage with Henri takes place, is that it lies behind an illusory wall, one of FromSoft's favorite tropes to hide secret items and game areas from all but the most diligent. If you're a newer player, it can be hard to spot them, since they otherwise look perfectly seamless with every environment. Once you do find out they're a thing, either from a message you find on the ground, through perusing the wiki, or just blind dumb luck, you'll find yourself looking for them everywhere. You'll be smacking and rolling every which way against every wall that looks at you funny, just in case there's a cool secret behind it. Illusory walls in this respect become one of the most bold-faced choices you can make. Your own initiative and agency obtains access to key items and enemy encounters you would have otherwise breezed past. There's nothing more satisfying than, say, beating Osiris, the Consumed King, than traveling down the subsequent tunnel to grab a Titanite scale from a chest. Then you find a bunch of messages on the ground telling you there's an illusory wall, and you're like, fuck yeah, let's see what's behind it! You can miss the untended graves. You can never touch it at all in a run, but if you've exercised your agency as a player enough, you're treated to one of the game's most profound areas, and a kick-ass rematch with Gundyr to boot. A dark reflection of the Cemetery of Ash and Firelink Shrine, it's implied that this zone exists in some malformed pocket of time, a glimpse into a past version of the starting area. You find the shrine handmade, though not the same one you know, or at least not as old. She takes note of your being unkindled and wonders why you've woken up without the bell having rung. If you proceed further into the shrine, there's yet another illusory wall. Behind it lies the eyes of a firekeeper, an item that unlocks what I believe to be the game's most consequential ending. If you go back to the real, present Firelink Shrine and give these eyes to the firekeeper, she becomes addled with visions of an end to the Age of Fire, a veil of eternal darkness drawn across the land. She asks, timidly, if this is really what you want, if you understand the weight of what you're doing. If you affirm this and go on to finish the game, you can summon the Firekeeper instead of linking the first flame. In a cutscene I don't think I'll ever stop thinking about, she tenderly cradles the last of the flame as it dies in her hands. She holds out hope that one day the flame might ignite again, getting a new age, maybe even a better one. The flame dies. Darkness settles. From the Umbra, that same tender voice asks,
Ashen One, hearest thou my voice still?
While writing this video, I finally got around to watching Jane Shumbrun's 2024 horror film, I Saw the TV Glow. It's an unbearably haunting film to experience, especially if you're trans. Shumbrun so vividly captures the anxiety of transition, the sense of finality quite fittingly represented in the protagonist Owen's justifiable terror at the thought of being buried alive. The core motif of the film, the fictional TV show The Pink Opaque, itself represents the director's adoration for Buffy the Vampire Slayer and their upbringing, along with the countless tentpole media that trans communities often congregate around. It's such an evocative idea that I began to consider what roles video games have played not just in my life, in my transition, but in the lives of so many of my peers, so many of the communities I've found myself a part of. In reflecting on this, I found Dark Souls 3's supreme intentional disobedience, the choice to let the first flame die out, let the Age of Fire end, let the Age of Dark commence, a representation of that same finality. By contrast, if we do what we're told, return all the Lords of Cinder to their thrones, link the fire, continue this age, blah blah blah, all that stuff, we're met with a pathetic smolder, rather than a grand flame, showing that no matter what we do, we've only delayed the inevitable. We get to bask in the comfort of the flame, at least a little longer, but could we really call that the ideal outcome? In a parallel to this, I Saw the TV Glow ends with Owen refusing to be buried alive, and living out the rest of his life in a body that doubles as his own prison. We watch him grow old and older until in a moment of deathly realization, he lashes out. The movie ends with him limping through the arcade he works at, mousily apologizing to guests who hardly notice him. He got to bask in the comfort of the flame, at least a little longer. Dark Souls 3, in creating a world story and set of mechanics that both allow for and encourage self-improvement and, dare I say, self-actualization, it almost perfectly suits a trans reading of its narrative, albeit probably a lot less intentional than that if I saw the TV glow. Intentionality doesn't change the fact that I and so many of my trans friends hold any Dark Souls game, if not Dark Souls 3 in particular, as all-time favorites. It's a validation of our struggles, an exploration of our grief, and an uncanny peek into the great black hole that is transition, along with what comes after. After all, could there be no stronger intentional disobedience than that of transition? It's a defiance of your upbringing, a rejection of the mold that those in power injected you within. If life is a game, and games are choices, and some of those choices go against the implied path, then the act of transition is a vibrant affirmation of life. Dark Souls 3 is my favorite game. It may not be yours, and that's okay. But it showed me that games are worth thinking about, worth talking about. Without it, I'd have never thought to touch games that engage in the same way it engages, to ponder the intent behind the designer's choice to build out a world in this way or that. It's a game and a mirror, a reflection of you and your choices. And in playing it, you're staring at that reflection, imagining a different you. There are stories out there worth building yourself for.
The moon hung low and dark and yellow, and it was about to burst. I biked over, uninvited. You received me with your warmth. Last night on Earth, decaying stars. I'm so in love with what we are. It's a poison to the spirit, not to tell you that. Stumble to the stairs, facing the ocean, caught up in my own shit. There's a hole in your heart, that's how the blood pours in and out of it. Tell me what you see in these binoculars, what that gave me. I can't believe that I believe that you believe in me. 60s pop melodies my mom sang to me. It goes, I wanna make you feel free.
Hey, it's me, Maple. Just some casual like Elden Ring footage to end this video with. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you again to my patrons who helped make this thing possible. If you like the video, please leave a like and consider subscribing with notifications turned on so you don't miss the next one. And feel free to leave a comment below and continue discussing what I've just talked about for the past half hour. A lot of this info was new to me, and if there's anything I didn't cover as thoroughly or misrepresented in any way, please let me know. If you really love the video, please consider checking out my Patreon, where right now you can watch a little DVD bonus behind the scenes feature I made alongside this video. Additionally, there's a whole collection of written blog posts detailing every step I took in producing this video. Plus, you'll get your name in the credits of future videos, along with making of content for my next thing after this. And again, thank you so much for watching. It means the world to me that you took time to watch this thing at the very least. And yeah, you have a great day. I'm gonna go fuck up this fire giant real quick. Peace out.